There's no false flag event that could justify an attack on Iran that exceeds what is happening in reality. Why do you need a false flag when you have a nuclear program that the United States will exaggerate and turn into a nuclear weapons capability that we've already said gives us justification to attack? You don't need a false flag. You have an ongoing conflict with Yemen. If you want an excuse, you can do what Trump is doing, saying that if Yemen continues to resist, and they will resist, we're going to blame Iran because Iran is supported. That's not a false flag. That's just the U.S. straight up saying we don't need a false flag. We don't need a USS Maine. We don't need some sort of sneak attack. We've created, this is half the problem, is that we've boxed ourselves into these stupid corners where we shouldn't be. We should not link Yemen's continued resistance to a potential military conflict with Iran. That is stupid. We should not link a difficult negotiating process with Iran over its nuclear program to the need for military action. But we've made these linkages. And why do we need a false flag under these circumstances? Even if we're going to talk about a conventional air campaign to try and drop down Iranian capabilities, which we can't do, any targeteer knows this, we ran out of the weapons. We've used them all against Yemen. We don't have the stocks necessary. We're out of precision guided munitions. And what is the president going to do? And again, this is why I think the solution ultimately is going to be the president's going to have to put pressure on Israel to get them to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza. That's the face-saving mechanism. It doesn't make it look like we were afraid to deal with Iran militarily, but we are. I have to be honest about this. Iran right now holds all the cards conventionally. And the only card we have is a nuclear card. And thank goodness Donald Trump doesn't yet want to play that card. It would be a disaster. It would be a humanitarian disaster, diplomatic disaster. It's stupidity personified, but that's where we're at right now. We've put ourselves in a very difficult position, but Iran ain't making it easy for us because they're pretty damn good at what they do. And this isn't Iran blustering. Iran has real capabilities, and these capabilities can cause significant harm. And I hate to say it, but we're in a position right now where we need Iranian maturity because you ain't getting any out of Washington, D.C. We need the Iranians to be the mature players here. And they've shown historically that they possess that capacity. So we'll see what's going to happen. But I don't have too much faith in the Trump administration anymore. I thought for a moment that Trump would listen to Steve Witkoff because Steve Witkoff was listening to the Iranians. I thought this was a great moment. I was really happy. But it appears that Marco Rubio's voice is louder than Steve Witkoff's voice. And the potential for a diplomatic off-ramp, if it hasn't totally collapsed, is collapsing as we speak.
Iran I
think Israel is carrying out a series of covert actions against Iran that are provocative in nature. And the goal is to get Iran to overreact and therefore use that as a justification to strike. I don't know what the facts are about what happened in Bandar Abbas, but according to news reports, these were precursors for solid rocket motor fuel that blew up, and that this could have been done by agents working on behalf of Israel. There's other things happening in Iran. Israel has a history of blowing things up, of taking out, assassinating scientists, assassinating foreign leaders. And I think I am worried about this. I am worried about Israeli provocation. I think the United States has told Israel that it will not tolerate a unilateral military action by Israel, meaning planes flying in and bombing, that we won't do that. If that's going to happen, it has to be a joint operation, and we're not there yet. But what I do see happening is that Israel will carry out increasingly aggressive covert actions that are designed to stress Iran and to generate an Iranian reaction that could be used as justification for less than. I do think if we're going to strike Iran, and I hope we don't, that we have to do it in a way that doesn't target Iran's nuclear program. It has to be a more limited attack that would trigger a limited Iranian response. That kind of thing. There has to be a pressure valve. We need the pressure relief. If we attack Iran's nuclear infrastructure, we can't do that without nuclear weapons, and that's a non-starter. I just don't think the United States is ready to go down that path. I don't think Iran wants to destroy Israel because that invites existential responses from others. But I do think that there's an absolute need for, and I say this with horror in my heart, but Israel has to be taught a lesson. And I think Israel, if it overplays its hand, the covert action is still an act of war against Iran. And Iran's not stupid. They know what's going on. They know what Israel's up to. They know what Israel's done in the past. They know what Israel is planning today. And I do believe at some point in time, Israel will overplay its hand and will create a window of opportunity for a limited Iranian response that could serve to collapse the pressure, meaning that instead of promoting a greater war, cause everybody to take a step back. Because if you knock I don't want to use bad language for Professor Marandi, but if you knock the dog poop out of Israel, you hit them hard, harder than they've ever been hit before in their entire life. I'm not talking about having a missile hit in the field, open field, or hitting some open play. I'm talking about hammering Israel, a decisive strike against a critical place that takes it off the map. And now Israel goes, oops. And Iran goes, we can do that again and again all day long. And you can't stop us. Once Israel wakes up to that reality and America wakes up to that reality, nobody trusts us anymore. Nobody takes us seriously anymore. All we are is a big goofy person with a bunch of weaponry, and we're running out of those weaponry. Why do you think we have $1 trillion defense budget, which, by the way, goes against what Donald Trump promised the American people? We have $1 trillion defense budget because we don't have any weapons left. We have to buy them all. We gave them all to Ukraine. We've thrown them all at Yemen. We got nothing left to fight with. So we're going to have to spend money that we don't have on an economy that's being destroyed because of stupid tariff policies.
And as Scott pointed out, this is partially thanks to the Chinese. Of course, I think we all know that, or many of us know, that this actually, General Soleimani was trying to create rapprochement with Saudi Arabia. The Iraqi prime minister at that time, when General Soleimani was murdered by Trump, Dr. Adel Abdul Mahdi told me personally that he was supposed to see General Soleimani for breakfast at 8 or 8:30, I don't remember now. And General Soleimani had entered Baghdad International Airport it was like 1 a.m. when he was martyred, but he was going to see the prime minister hours later to discuss a letter from Saudi Arabia about rapprochement. And that, of course, I think that probably had something to do with the assassination, among other things. But the point is that Iran has been working towards rapprochement thanks to the role that the Chinese played, which is the exact opposite of the United States, which tries to divide and rule. The relationship has improved. So today we see embassy takeover was the result of the coup, the United States imposing its dictator on the Iranian people, creating the Savak, the notorious secret police, and then helping the Shah gun down, supporting the Shah when he gunned down people on the streets during the revolution, many thousands of people. And so when the Americans gave refuge to the Shah, students took over the embassy. They were afraid of a new coup, and also they wanted the Shah back for being a mass murderer. And so that was, of course, how the Americans like to define it. But the reality is that U.S. hostility towards Iran is because of Israel. And if it wasn't for Israel, the situation would not be like this. Not just for Iran, this region wouldn't be. If you go and sit in a taxi and talk about the nuclear negotiations, the taxi driver will say, "This guy is crazy." When I was in China, as I said just last week, one of the extraordinary things is that in this trade war, something that people don't talk about that often, is that in China, not only do they have an advantage because they produce goods and the Americans don't, and all that, their population, but also the very fact that Trump initiated this unites the people of China, because they're not going to blame their government first when there's hardship. I'm sure they will. Whenever there's hardship, people blame the government for good or for rightly or wrongly. But a lot of the blame will be put on the Americans. The American society.
First of all, I just want to back up based on my own personal experience. I had the honor and privilege of traveling to Iran back in 2006, I believe, right after Ahmadinejad was president. And I thought I was going to see a police state. I thought I was going to see people intimidated, especially with Ahmadinejad's reputation. And I can vouch that when I entered into a restaurant, unfortunately for me, I was a known fact. I couldn't be covert in Iran. And when I entered a restaurant, people were like, "Scott Ritter, why are you here?" Next thing you know, I'm surrounded by people we have now a table full of people. And it was entertaining because there was more different opinions on every topic. Things that you thought would have been For sure, I would say, oh, an Iranian will take this position. No, man, what is an Iranian apparently? Because you couldn't say that's an Iranian position. That's not. As Professor Marandi said, there was 100 different positions, and it was amazing to watch. And it was all sophisticated conversation too. It wasn't the kind of inanity you get in the United States, often very simplistic, sometimes racist, xenophobic. These were sophisticated arguments coming from a place of intelligence. They just had different opinions, and it was a lot of fun to watch. And I learned a lot about Iran during that trip, that it was a far more open society than, as I told people, I've been to Middle East dictatorships. And Iran is not a Middle East dictatorship. It's the furthest thing from it, at least the Iran that I experienced. The United States, unfortunately, look, let's just deal with the reality. We have to go back and talk about the military-industrial complex. We have to talk about the warning that we have to talk about the United States after World War II. We were a nation that was suffering through a Great Depression. We get this war. We mobilize our national industry for military purposes, and our economy is recovering. A lot of aspects of this war were designed to achieve economic dominance. Bretton Woods, what we did with the British, a lot of people don't realize that we basically sucked the British dry when it came to terms of their gold reserves and all that. We did the same to the French. We wanted to bring down colonial competition. We wanted America to reign supreme around the world. In order to sustain this, while we might have promoted peace and prosperity through the United Nations, we didn't desire peace and prosperity. We needed conflict. We needed an enemy. Our enemy was the Soviet Union, the Chinese. We created the Cold War, and our economy developed in that way. You look at the 1950s, and the whole purpose of the Red Scare was to justify building bombers and building missiles and continuing to build a strong U.S. military. Dwight Eisenhower warned us about this, about the danger of becoming addicted to a military economy, but we sustained that addiction, and that's the addiction that we have today. Look, $1 trillion. How do we justify $1 trillion defense budget? We don't justify it by making peace. This is why, Donald Trump is such a huge disappointment, because we could have brought down defense spending by making real peace with Ukraine and Iran. And that's what I believed in. I believed I was going to give him a chance to do that. But we can't. We're incapable, because as a nation, we can only exist. Americans don't like to admit this, but this is the God's honest truth. We are wealthy because we steal from the world. We steal from the world because of unequal arrangements. We obtain global resources at costs that are far below what normally would be if we engaged in normal economic interaction. And our economy needs these to keep prices low so the American people can continue to be lured up to the dream of the American dream. Our economic planners here in America, their job is to keep every American citizen on the cusp of bankruptcy, meaning that we are now prisoners. We have to buy into this consumer mentality where we have to consume to our economic detriment, but we keep believing that there's the potential of something good happening, a breakthrough moment. And suddenly you're 70 years old and you realize that your life has been wasted pursuing a false dream. That's America in a heartbeat. That's the truth. In order to keep this going, we have to have wars. It's almost Orwellian, where we have to have enemies. There was a book written in the 1970s by Stockwell, I think, a former CIA guy, In Search of Enemies. We're a nation in search of enemies. We need enemies. We must have enemies. If we don't have enemies, we can't function. We don't know how to function without enemies. So if there isn't a real enemy out there, we're going to make one. Iran is not a real enemy of the United States. I know that the Iranians have a huge grudge against us. The coup that Professor Marandi speaks about is the coup against Mossadegh in 1953, where we overthrew a democratically elected leader of Iran. If we believed in democracy, we should have believed in Mossadegh, but Mossadegh believed in Iranian oil being used to the benefit of the Iranians, not for the benefit of the British. And the British said, we can't have him taking our oil. And so America came in and we helped overthrow. We put in the Shah and we helped impose decades-long autocratic rule that was very cruel. America likes to show photographs of Tehran in the 1970s with the women in their miniskirts and Frank Sinatra singing at a concert. We're saying, isn't that wonderful? It might be wonderful for us, but what about the Iranians? Do we respect the fact that many Iranians are conservative in nature? And maybe the miniskirt isn't the thing that resonates with most of them. I don't think Iran went to war because of the miniskirt. The revolution wasn't because of the miniskirt. The revolution was because of the Shah Savak and the oppression of the people. And what happens is you get a cause and effect relationship. I call it Newton's third law of physics applied to geopolitics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And when you wrap miniskirts into an autocracy dictatorship that's oppressing people, when the pushback comes back, the miniskirts go. And so does Frank Sinatra, and does so all the things of the Western trappings. But Iran is not a natural enemy of the West. If anything, Iran is a natural ally of the West. When you look at Iranian history and even the inclination of Iran, when I was doing research on Iran's nuclear program back in 2004, I was talking to some people about Iran's academic infrastructure. And they said, look, Iran has the highest percentage of peer-reviewed PhDs in the world. And the majority of their peer review takes place in the West, meaning that the intellectual development of Iran is developing on par with and aligned with the intellectual development in the West. Like minds thinking alike. It's not foreign. Iran is not foreign to the West, and the West is not foreign to Iran. And if it weren't for an artificiality like the United States coming in and compelling, or Israel stirring the pot up, because the United States is acting on behalf of Israel. There's just no doubt about that. We pick on Iran because Iran has chosen through their constitution, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Marandi, but Professor Marandi, but the Iranian constitution is the only constitution in the region that mentions Palestine and the duty to promote Palestine. Israel takes umbrage at that, so Iran becomes a natural enemy of Israel. But if it weren't for Israel,
the negotiations that take place, the very fact that Iran is carrying out these indirect negotiations, is that they want the global South, the global majority public opinion, to see the problem as being an American problem. But then on the other hand, if the United States is open to an agreement, a reasonable agreement that where the Americans respect Iran's sovereignty, then that's fine too. But Iran is preparing itself. Iran is, the last few months, Iran has gained a lot of intelligence about the US and Israeli defense capabilities through True Promise 1 and 2, and I'm sure through Yemen and what's going on in Yemen. And at the same time, the Israeli regime, its airstrikes and US support for those airstrikes has given Iran a lot of intelligence. It's the first time that Iran has been dealing with airstrikes since Saddam Hussein's the Western back war against Iran by Saddam Hussein. So the Iranians are using these months to prepare themselves. But what I would like to also point out is that it's really quite fascinating that Trump wanted to bring about an end to the war in Ukraine to focus on China and probably on West Asia. But what he's actually done is the exact opposite. He's reinforcing the relationship between Moscow and Beijing and Moscow and Tehran. And he is also dividing US power and the power of the West, whatever that means nowadays, and taking into account the divide between Europe and the United States.
This guy is literally doing everything he can to facilitate the collapse of the United States. And it's not a good time to be an American. I'll tell you that. This is a man who said he wanted to make America great again. He's made America an embarrassment. He's made America a failure. Anything but great. This is, other than the fact that we avoided short-term a nuclear conflict with Russia, this president has achieved nothing positive at all.
Obviously, the United States likes to use the embassy takeover, and they use that as the beginning of history, effectively, like October the 7th, where they use it as the starting point in everything, whereas it began with the Nakba even before then, and decades of oppression against the Palestinians and genocidal attacks and ethnic cleansing has been going on. But they choose that in order to hide the reality. These Kfiri militants that the Americans and oil and gas-rich countries in the Persian Gulf have been funding for decades. In the past, mostly the Saudis, more recently the Qataris and Turkey have been the center of support for these groups. He helped with the genocidal attacks in Yemen, which killed probably hundreds of thousands of people. And he initiated the dirty war in Syria, where Erdogan, Abdullah of Jordan, Tad and others betrayed the Syrian people and murdered hundreds of thousands of people and destroyed the country. And it is what it is today, thanks to these regimes that followed Obama. Of course, Erdogan had his own personal ambitions, but he destroyed Syria in the meanwhile, being an agent of the United States. So Obama did all that. But Obama had a soft power, and he also did the drone attacks. He was the guy who started bombing people with and killing people with drones, and we know that overwhelmingly they were innocent, and he knew that.
If I were the Iranians, I would have too launched a new missile and said, aha, whatever you think. Because remember, America, we have a Secretary of Defense who's a man-child. He's not really an adult. He's just this boy playing at warrior. And he was briefed by the Department of Defense that, see, we evaluated the Iranian attack too, in True Promise. Those warheads, very capable warheads, they required electronic functionality. We knew that. We knew there's a lot of things happening up there. So we've developed capabilities to jam them. And so we've deployed jammers who are going, as these missiles come in, we're going to make their electronics not work, and the missile's not going to do what it wants to do. And what Iran just did is went, yeah, we're aware of what you were doing, and we got a missile now that beats your jammer. And I think the Yemeni missile that was fired in there beats the jammer too. And so Iran and Yemen have both said, you ain't got nothing on us. We're here. We're ready to do this. And again, hopefully somebody's briefing the president, Tulsi Gabbard, saying, Mr. President, we don't want to do this. There isn't, first of all, we're using up all of our conventional munitions in this failed military operation against Yemen. We've used a vast number of these precision-guided munitions, and we don't have an infinite stockpile of them. And if we continue this strike against Yemen, we start eating down the assets we have in the Pacific that we're supposed to use against a potential war in China, or the assets we have in Europe that we're supposed to use in case of a NATO war against Russia. We're going to chew all those down. And at the end of the day, we won't be able to implement a conventional war plan against Iran. So Trump is looking at a situation where he has boxed himself into a corner where the only military, plan that he has that could guarantee an American victory is one that nobody could, even Donald Trump in his worst day, can't comprehend using. But if Iran were to go in there and show that it can do serious harm to Israel, serious harm, and still have reserve capacity to finish the job, Israel will have to take some action, and the United States will have to make a choice. Are we going to commit suicide on behalf of Israel, or are we going to have to back down? But this is a man-child that we have here. This is literally the worst president the American people have ever elected because he's so unpresidential. I despise Joe Biden, but Joe Biden could be presidential at times when his brain functioned. Even when his presidential behavior, I opposed. I was against the policies. This is a man who can't be presidential. He's incapable of being presidential because to be presidential, you have to have humility to the Constitution, humility and fealty to the Constitution, and humility before the American people and the world. If you're going to be the world's strongest man, then you have to be a man capable of being humble with that strength. And Donald Trump isn't the strongest man. He's a weak man. He bends to all the pressure that's put on him. He doesn't know what he stands for, except if Donald Trump doesn't emerge number one, then he doesn't want to do it. That's not how the world works. The world isn't built to make Donald Trump
the brother of the crown prince, bringing a message from the king. And the language used during that trip by the defense minister was quite extraordinary. And Ayatollah Khamenei, he met him, he received him, which was, I think, was very significant. That usually does not happen. He said something that I thought, and some of my friends also think, was very significant. He said that we'd be happy to give pass on our scientific knowledge to Saudi Arabia, which I think it was clear that he was alluding to Iran's nuclear program and enrichment. I'm not saying that the relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia are going to be ideal. Iran, of course, is...
This would require a level of introspection that can only come with humility and intelligence. And this administration isn't known for either. Probably the best positioned is Tulsi Gabbard, but she's not a policymaker. She provides intelligence. And you saw with her, when she did her threat assessment, global threat assessment, the assessment she put out about Iran was a very specific assessment designed to create the potential for negotiation. She did her job, and she has been advocating against military action against Iran, but she's been pushed to the side by both the National Security Advisor, who's now fired, and now